Yeah, it's all right.
The whiskey is exceptional.
We're going to talk about High Elul. High Elul is next Shabbos. It used to be learned for many years by Frum Yidden as the last 12 days of the year, and it was common amongst Frum Jews to approach this period, or the 12 days, as an opportunity to structure tshuva 1 month per day. In other words, to go back over the year and to try and work out a heshbon nefesh, a spiritual balance sheet, and try and go through each month and do tshuva where you went wrong in each month. Now, you need to be organized for that. Some people used to keep diaries, other people. But that's not what we're going to be learning tonight. What we're going to learn tonight is, I warn you, a lot of people will struggle to believe some of the things that I'm going to tell you. If they struggle to believe it, let me put it to you that it's their problem, because I'm not going to tell you anything that has been grown by ordinary people like you and me. What I tell you is straight from the Rebbeim. And if a Rebbe tells a story, then you can be absolutely certain that it's true. Hi, there's a chair up here. And the l'chaim here. So, Hayel, we tell a lot of stories about Hayel because the subject matter is deeply spiritual and really other dimensional. And the problem, what we're going to try and journey to together tonight is to try and make sense of this spiritual dimension in our physical world. Because that is the essence of Chabad, and that's what the essence of why we in Chabad celebrate High Elul so seriously. So I want to start with this. I want to tell you a personal story, and this isn't from the Rebbeim, but I promise you that every word I'm telling you is the truth. It's in one of my books, but I just want to run through it quickly so that we have a point of reference as we travel tonight. About 30 years ago, so it would have been about 1990-ish, after the Rebbe's first stroke and before the Rebbe's second stroke, my mother-in-law was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and it's quite a longish story, and I'm going to cut it short, otherwise we won't get through the evening. But very briefly, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. It was massive in size. It was the size of a mandarin, a medium-sized mandarin, small orange. And she was rushed to, they took her to St. Vincent's, and a whole team of doctors at St. Vincent's decided that she was inoperable. The reason she was inoperable was that she'd had some radiation treatment during the war, and her scalp was the skin on her scalp was very, very thin. This tumor was huge and was very close to some part of the brain. So there were two serious problems. One was the excision of the actual tumor and the risk of touching it, the nearby, whatever it was. I'm not a doctor, I don't know. But the second problem, and apparently even greater a problem, was that the skin was so thin that the plastic surgeon didn't believe it would heal. And if it didn't heal, there would be infection. And if there was infection, then the infection would have the result of her not dying, but becoming a vegetable, being paralyzed, awake and tortured for the rest of her life. So you can imagine it was in our family dynamic, it was a terrible thing, and so that was the result of St. Vincent's. So then the family decided, or she decided with my father-in-law, that they wanted a second opinion, so they went to Prince of Wales. There was a team of doctors there. There was a plastic surgeon, there was a brain surgeon, all over again. Cut a long story short, they came out with the same psak, the same ruling, that she shouldn't have the operation. And so my wife has a younger sister. They're only two children, and they decided in those days the fax machine was a new invention, great scientific tool. They came to the office. They wanted to write into the Rebbe to get a brocha for that, as they couldn't operate and save a life, that at least the last period of time, which was going to be very quick according to the doctors, would be as pain-free as possible. Apparently there's a lot of pain associated with this condition, and they wanted it to be as comfortable as possible. Now this was between the first Chof Zion Adar and the first stroke and the second stroke, and the Rebbe had a stroke on exactly the same day, Chof Zion Adar, 2 years apart. And in that period, the Rebbe couldn't speak, and he would, there was a system developed where he would nod his head or shake his head and questions were put to him in the alternatives. So take a silly example, should I use my right hand or my left hand? And he would shake his hand, or he would nod his head on the yes or no. So they wrote in, and about a quarter of an hour, and they were leaving my office. We sent the thing from my office. They were leaving my office, and suddenly the phone rings, and Rabbi Groner, who was my contact, my pathway through to the Rebbe, said, look, Robert, I'm ringing you because I didn't think a written response would cover what happened, and I want to explain it to you so you can explain it to your wife and her sister. When I read their kvittel to the Rebbe, when I read their note to the Rebbe got very agitated, and I didn't know what it was, and he kept shaking his head vigorously, and slowly but surely I was able to ask him with various alternatives, did the Rebbe mean that she should have the operation? And finally, when I got that, the Rebbe's face relaxed much more, and he nodded his head very vigorously. So I said, Rebbe, I just want to understand clearly what is being said here. Are you saying that she should have the operation and everything will be all right? And the Rebbe nodded his head again. And I wanted you to know that, so you should pass that on. I said thank you to him, hung up. I called the girls in. I told them they were simcha gedola, right? They were so happy. Their mother was going to live. She was going to be all right. There was going to be a miracle. Blah, blah, blah. And so quickly take us to my mother. So I drive them to my mother-in-law's house. She was here in Bellevue Hill. My office is in Double Bay. We get to the house, we go in, and the girls say, Mum, what fantastic news for you. You're going to live. You're going to be all right. And she said, what are you talking about? She said, we've written into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, everything's going to be all right. You're going to live. And my mother-in-law said, you became crazy like Robert. You become meshuggah for what? What are you, crazy? 3 doctors from Prince of Wales say not to have the operation. 3 doctors from the other hospital say not to have the operation. And a rabbi in New York says, has the rabbi seen my x-rays? Has the rabbi seen my blood work? And you want me to listen to a rabbi in New York and not the doctors and not the hospital? You crazy? So, to be fair, it's a persuasive perspective if you're not if you're not Lubavitch and not a believer. So, but my father-in-law, bless his memory, was a very very practical, centered, normal guy, very humble in his own way. And he said, look, you know, I don't say you should run and have the operation, but at least let's go and see another doctor. So my mother-in-law said, I'm not going to another doctor. I'm not having another MRI and another CT and another, more bloods and she had enough. She'd been going through all of this for 6 months or so. My father-in-law said, do it for our daughters, do it for the children. Right? So they went to see a general practitioner, not even a specialist. And they showed it was Gonski. You know, the Gonski that's here now, this was his father. His father was a GP. So they went to see Gonski, and Gonski looks at the thing and he says, I'll tell you the truth, I haven't the faintest idea. But there's a brain surgeon called Besser in Newtown. So I think you should go and see Besser. So he picks up the phone and makes an appointment for the next morning to see Besser. Besser looks at all the blood work, looks at all the x-rays, looks at all the... And he says, I really don't understand what the fuss is. He said, I do much more difficult. Booked her in 2 days later. She had all the surgery. She then lived, you've got to understand, she lived another 20 years, right? 20 years. But the question is this, I'm not telling you the story just to tell you a story. I'm telling you the story because we need to introduce a perspective. You have to ask the following questions. Let's suppose that you allow that the Rebbe isn't a Rasha, God forbid, that he isn't an irresponsible villain. I want to ask you, who would take the responsibility, sitting in New York, to Paskin after a stroke that Mrs. Steiner in Sydney, Australia, should ignore 2 teaching hospitals with all of their staff and all of their tests and have this operation? Who would do that? And you have to conclude, if it's going to have any logic in your head at all, you have to conclude that the only person that would be able to do that is someone who knows the result. Would you agree with that? He has to know. He can't think, can't have a bit of a feeling. Who can do that? Who can take that responsibility? So he has to know. So I want to start this exercise about Chayil with the fact that there is a dimension out there, a whole dimension out there, that you and I, unless you're in Tzaddikim, and if you are, then I'll leave you out of this conversation, but for regular, ordinary people, no matter whether you're intelligent or not intelligent, this or that, this is a dimension which we just have no access to. No access to, and it's not a matter that it was a good guess. It's not a matter of good bet. This is somebody who must have known. And how does he know? For me, that's unanswerable. Right? Now, what happened Chayil is that on Chayil, 2 neshamas came into this world. One was the Baal Shem Tov, the beginner of all of Chabad Hasidus, all Hasidus, not Chabad Hasidus, all Hasidus. And 2 generations later, in other words, while he was still alive, but an old man, the Alter Rebbe, who is the Rabbi Shneur Zalman and the author of the Tanya and the author of the Shulchan Aruch. These two souls were both born on High Elul. And you should know that the Hasidic world went to great lengths to hide this fact until 1963. I'm sorry, 1943. Apologies. So in 1943, 50 years after the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe's bar mitzvah, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe told publicly the fact for the first time that on his bar mitzvah, which was then 50 years earlier, his father, the Rebbe Rashab, called him into his study and told him before he came in to put on Shabbos clothes. And he came in to his father's study, and his father was in Shabbos clothes, and the father said, I'm going to tell you that, but you're not allowed to repeat it for a yovel. You're not allowed to repeat this for 50 years. That today is Chai Elul. It's the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov, that people don't know that that's his birthday, but that's when he was born, and the birthday of the Alter Rebbe. And we'll see why that's important in a minute. And the Friedrich Rebbe, of course, kept the secret for 50 years, but in 1943, 50 years after his bar mitzvah, he had a Farbrengen in which he mentioned it for the first time in public, and he gave out a sikha, which he had written, which is about 100 pages long, on which many of these secrets are revealed. So, L'chaim, L'chaim. Everyone should say L'chaim. It's Chai Elul. It's a day of very big celebration. There's very powerful spiritual forces at work, I can tell you. As I hope we'll see. Trouble is that very hard to do it in an hour. Before we start, I just want to tell you another. Chai Elul is a mass of stories. This is really more of a Farbrengen than a shir, I've got to tell you, because there was a. I'll tell you this also quickly. During the times of the Baal Shem Tov, he had a group of yeshiva bochrim who were sitting and learning they lived in Poland, and they were sitting and learning, these bochrim, and it was a really freezing Polish winter night, many degrees below zero, howling wind, snow, and a goy knocks on the window of the shul and says that his wagon's overturned in the mud and he needs help to turn it over and needs help to rescue the horse. So these bochrim are sitting near a fire and it's cold outside, and they have this learned discussion between them whether they should help this guy. Why? Because they were learning Torah, which is a mitzvah, and you don't interrupt a mitzvah unless there is no one else who can do it. But if there's other people that can do it, then the halakha is that you don't interrupt the mitzvah. So they said there must be people outside who can do it, so we're going to stay in here. So the leader boy, the head boy there, goes to the window and he says, "Nie musisz." In Polish, he says,
Nie musisz.
We can't.
You can't do it.
We can't do it. And the goy is standing outside says, my parents were Polish, but you think I remember these words. He says, "Musisz, ale nie
Chajish.
Can, but you don't want.
You can, but you don't want to. Right?
Yeah.
So, and the story doesn't have a good ending. One of the people suffered terribly as well. I won't go into that. I just want to do this part. That this goy said, you can, but you don't want to. And we have a vort from our Rebbe that says, if you think you can't do something, you're right. And if you think you can do something, you're right. In other words, what does it mean? That, and the Rebbe has a phrase that nothing stands in the way of will, nothing stands in the way of rotzen. If you want something enough, I'll give you an example. The first sukkah I ever made 45 years ago, Rabbi Philman was my first teacher and friend, and he gave me instructions. We lived further down Victoria Road in those days, and we had a terrace, and I bought the materials for the sukkah, and I made this very primitive, I wanted to make this very primitive sukkah the day before Sukkot, and it was a marble. It was pouring, lightning, thunder, rain, and I rang Rabbi Philman and said to him, you know, you look at the weather outside, do I have to build a sukkah if the weather's so bad? And he said, you know, I'm a rabbi. We don't give papal dispensation. If you want to do what you're supposed to do, you do it. If you don't want to do it, you don't do it. He said, but I've got a suggestion for you. He said, and in those days, $100,000 was a lot of money. He said, if you were to earn $100,000 by building the sukkah and nothing by not building the sukkah, would you build it? Right? In those days, $100,000. The house in Bellevue Hill was $120,000. So you have there's the dimension that I've tried to describe with my mother-in-law and the Rebbe that we have no access to, and the other side of that dimension is Gashmis, is physicality, is our life, and our life is so much within our control, and so much the visibility is so clear that if you really want something, you can get it. If you don't want something, you don't get it. If you can blame anything, but at the end of the day, it comes down to your and my effort. So they're the two poles that we're going to be talking about. One pole is the supernatural that we don't have access to. One pole is the very, very natural, and the more you're in control of it, the more natural it is. So these two souls that we're going to be learning about, the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, represent within that spiritual dimension these two polar extremes. The Baal Shem Tov was a Baal Moifus. It means he was a miracle worker. His miracles were open. Menachem, can I ask you to close the door? I'm freezing. Thank you very much. You can hear from it there. He was a Baal Moifus. He was a miracle worker. His miracles were unashamedly open for everybody to see. And not only were they open for everybody to see, but he worked with those miracles. I'll give you an example from another story. We have a lot of stories with Hayel, but they're stories from Rebbeim. So if the Friedrich Rebbe tells a story, it's not a fairy tale. It's 100% true. So the Baal Shem Tov used to travel a lot. He used to go from place to place to spread this new business, which we're going to learn about in a moment, of Hasidus. And he came to a village, and there he saw this, and he came to an inn, and he wanted some food. So he asked, was there any food? And the innkeeper's wife said, yes, but my husband's davening. So he says, "No, very nice that he's davening. I'm very happy to hear it, and I'll wait." So he's waiting, and he's waiting, and he's waiting, and he goes back to the wife and he says, "No." She said, "He's davening." He waits and he waits. Finally, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, this guy comes out. He's been waiting all day, and the Baal Shem Tov says, "You've been davening all this time?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "I'm a very simple guy. Forgive me, I can read Hebrew, but I don't understand a word. And when I'm davening, so somebody gave me this book called this Siddur, but I don't know what to say on what day. So what I do is I start on page 1, and I go through to the end." And the Baal Shem Tov said, "What do you mean? Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv?" He says, "Yeah, I don't know. Shabbos? Yeah, I don't know.
What else is there?
Hallel?"
Yeah, everything.
Everything. So the Baal Shem Tov said, "Really? So let me teach you." So he sits down, and they get some pieces of coloured paper and tear them into strips, and he devises a colour scheme for Shabbos and Mincha, Ma'ariv, etc. And they put these leaves in the Siddur, and he feeds him in gratitude, and the Baal Shem Tov leaves. They hug each other for a bracha, etc. And he leaves. A wind comes and blows out all the pages. So this poor guy who spent he's running.
It's about when you cross the river.
Coming. So I'm glad you know the story. It's terrific that you do.
35 times, yeah.
Yeah, and you know what?
I don't know.
It's for a good reason that you hear it that often. So he runs after the Baal Shem Tov, and he wants to catch him to get him to show him how to do it. So he sees that the Baal Shem Tov comes to the river, and there's no bridge, and he needs to cross it. So he sees that the Baal Shem Tov takes out his handkerchief and puts it on the water, stands on the handkerchief, and goes across the river. So he does the same thing. The Baal Shem Tov doesn't see him. And when he gets to the other side and he runs after the Baal Shem, finally catches up to him. So he explains what's he going to do, that all the pages have all gone and he's gone. And the Baal Shem Tov said, "How did you get here?" He said, "I watched you. You took out your handkerchief so I took out my handkerchief and I went across the same way." The Baal Shem Tov looks at him and he says, "You don't need the Siddur." Again, you have this, and this was the Baal Shem Tov's life. All of his life was stories like this. He was a miracle worker. He was unashamedly a miracle worker. You have to know in Chabad, I'm going to explain in a minute, in Chabad, the Rebbeim weren't interested in miracles. They weren't interested in publicizing miracles. The Mittler Rebbe's wife said that under our table were thousands of miracles and no one ever bent down to pick one up, right? Because it was viewed with disdain, and I'll explain why in a minute. But at the Baal Shem Tov's level, the first level of, he was an open miracle worker unashamedly. So the question is why? And what I want to take you through is, first of all, who he was, and second of all, why he was a Baal Moifus, why he was a miracle worker. So who he was this. There are certain tzaddikim that are so great that not only can they work miracles, but he, for example, knew who he was in the previous Gilgul. Does everyone know what Gilgul means? It's the previous incarnation. A Jew's neshama has to do 613 mitzvahs. It's given lifetimes to do that. If in one lifetime it does, let's say 100, that 100 gets split off and that part of his neshama goes to Gan Eden, and the remainder comes back into another life to get to do those mitzvahs. The Baal Shem Tov knew who he was in the previous Gilgul, and his teacher was a very great tzaddik who lived in the time of David HaMelech. And the Baal Shem Tov lived the following life. He was orphaned at the age of 5. He then learned until he was 26. At the age of 26, he began to learn with his teacher, who had been dead for nearly 3,000 years. His name was Achia Hashaloni. He's a figure in Tanakh. We haven't got time to deal with it, but he sat and learned with him for 10 years. When I say he, we don't understand that because he didn't learn in a physical body, but the room in which they learned had 2 chairs and it had 2 svarim. We have witnesses for that. But they learned together for 10 years until he was 36. When he was 36, his teacher told him it was time that he revealed himself, who he was, and he had to then be responsible for spreading this new level of learning of Torah, the soul of Torah rather than the body of Torah. And in order to do that, he had to set himself up as the leader of this new development in Torah. And he refused. He said, how can I do that? I'm 36 years of age. Europe was full of deeply learned people of great stature. And he's a young pisher of 36 years of age, and he's supposed to lead them. So his teacher, Achia Hashaloni, said to him that, I know who you are, and you know who you are, and the whole reason your neshama is in a guf is to do this, and you have no right to abdicate from this, and that's why you were born, that's your mission in life, and that's what you've got to do. And so he then accepted that, and he did then, nobody knew who he was, nobody had any idea who he was. He then did reveal himself and then became the founder of the Hasidic movement as we know it. His father, when he was 5 years old and his father was dying, his father called him in, and the Baal Shem Tov's name was Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. So he called him in and he said, Yisraelik, before I die, I want you to teach you 2 things. And these 2 things have to be the soul torches in your life you have in front of you. The first is that you can never, ever be frightened of anything whatsoever other than your God. There is nothing that you can be frightened of other than your God. We're going to come to this in a minute, because you have to understand, he didn't explain why. It was an instruction. You are not allowed ever in your life to feel fear for anything but your God. That was number 1. Number 2 was that you have to love every Jew like it's your mother and father and sister and brother. You have to just love every Jew. Doesn't matter if they're tall or short or fat or skinny, stupid, clever, nice, not. You have to love them. You have to love them with all your heart and all your soul. And they were the 2 instructions that he gave him, and that became the foundation of Hasidus. That Jews, and they accepted that for 200, not 200, but for a generation and a half. They accepted that because he was so powerful, he was so magnetic a personality, he was a miracle worker, an obvious miracle worker. And when you're confronted by that kind of obvious access to a spiritual dimension, like when the Rebbe said, the story with my mother-in-law, I can give you a much shorter one. There was a guy his son was being operated on in New York. And this is a well-known story in Chabad. And the he wanted to go he used to be from in Poland. This was in the 60s. The father used to be, and he gave everything away because of the Holocaust. When his son was terminally ill, to have a major operation, he decided he wanted to get a brocha from the Rebbe. They lived in New York. So he caught the subway and went, and he could only get an appointment at 1:30 in the morning, and he had to have the kid in the hospital the next day at 10 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was. But he went, and he gets there at 1 o'clock, and the Rebbe's running late. And it's 2 o'clock, and it's 3 o'clock, and it's 4 o'clock, and he doesn't know what to do. Finally he goes in, finally gets in at 4 o'clock, and he's got a quarter of an hour to get to the train, to get back to get his son to take him to the hospital. And he says to the Rebbe, he tells him what's happened, and he says that he's come to ask for a brocha. He had to wait so long, but he's going to get his train, and can he have a brocha for the refuah shalema for the operation, that the operation would be a success for his son. And the Rebbe looks at him and he says, your son doesn't need an operation. So this guy says, look, Rebbe, I've been waiting here for 3 hours, right? I didn't come to you for medical advice. Medical advice we have. A hospital's waiting for us. I came to you for a brocha. The Rebbe said, but your son doesn't need an operation. So the guy repeats it the third time. Third time the Rebbe tells him he doesn't need, and he goes out and he slams the door. And he leaves, right? When he gets to the hospital, they reassess the child, and they tell him that he doesn't need an operation. So file that away, because we're going to come back to this. The same area as my mother-in-law, the same thing. Except with my mother-in-law, the Rebbe told her to have the operation, and with this kid, he said he doesn't need an operation. Right? So the Baal Shem Tov functioned at that level, and the Hasidim, the people that he taught, functioned at that level, but out of belief, out of emunah, out of pure. They saw evidence of it, and because they saw the evidence of it, they functioned within that. So, and why was this necessary at this point in history? Because this was a point in history in the late 1700s when Jewry was really at one of its lowest points in history. They were very poor in Europe at that time. They were subject to vicious pogroms. There was Khmelnytsky pogroms.
Visitors, Robert.
Oh, so can someone let him in? Yeah.
Unexpected.
So this the pogroms were where is he? Oh, come sit down. What's wrong? We're learning about Chai Elul.
Go.
And you have to have a l'chaim, and we've got especially good l'chaim tonight. Sit. So Jews were at a very low matzav. They were in a very bad position. They were poor. They were persecuted. They were pogromed. There was almost a caste system in Jewry. You should know this, that people who could learn were aristocrats. People who couldn't learn were considered to be nobodies. And comes the Baal Shem Tov revived Jewry in the sense that it says that if you mention somebody's name, if they're faint, they wake up or they are revived. He revived Jewry. How did he revive Jewry? By making available to them access to his miracle working and his the two things that his father told him. He can't be scared of anything but God, and he has to love every Jew like himself. I'm looking at the time. I haven't got through page 1 yet. See, this is really, if I bring it, it really should go for a couple of hours, but you've all got wives and commitments, so I'll try and get to in our time limit. So that was what the Baal Shem Tov did. And you know, to give you some idea, he knew who the neshama of his father, the neshama of his father, how was he chosen to bring the Baal Shem Tov soul into the world? He loved ordinary Jews, which was unheard of. One day somebody came to his town and walked in, which means he was Machal Shabbos, because you can't travel on Shabbos. And he invited him for lunch and fed him and gave him access to be washed and all the rest of it. And in the merit of his having unlimited Avos Yisrael, that was the conduit for the Baal Shem Tov's soul to come down into this world. Now I'm summarizing, that's the Baal Shem Tov. Now we have to move to the Alter Rebbe, because he's the other soul that was born on Chayil. And the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe is a whole different story in one way. The Alter Rebbe was a new soul. Now I have to explain what that means. And it may surprise you if you haven't thought about this on your own, and why would you have? But the only thing that we experience in our lifetime that hasn't been created is our neshama. The soul, we have two souls. We have a nefesh habahamis, an animal soul, and we have a nefesh elokis, a godly soul. The nefesh habahamis is created. When we go through Bereshis in the story of creation of man, that he made a pile of mud or dirt and breathed into it a nishmas chaim, it says, a breath of life. That breath of life is the animal soul. That's what enlivens a human being. All the rest of creation is enlivened by a nefesh, a soul, an animal soul. All the animals have animal souls. A human being has an animal soul like everything else, but a Jew has an extra level to that soul. This isn't a matter of superiority, this is a matter of responsibility. I haven't got time for that at the moment, but that extra level of the soul is called a neshama. Our neshama is a halek Eloika mimal, a part of God himself. What does that mean, a part of God himself? It's not part of creation. God wasn't created. No part of God is created. So everything that God has created in Gashmias, in physicality, is created, but not the neshama, not the soul. Into Gashmias comes some souls. So neshamas, which are halek elokah, which are part of godliness, are introduced into creation. When did that happen? Basically at the beginning of the time of Adam Rishon. But every now and again, every few thousand years, to use the Rebbe's word, there is what's called a neshama hadosha, a new soul, a new part of godliness that has never lived before, and it's sent down with a new mission to reveal new levels of light. The Alter Rebbe was such a neshama. It was a new soul. And because the Baal Shem Tov was a miracle worker, and because he had the vision that he recognized that this was coming. He was told that this soul was coming. Was told. I don't understand what that means, but in one of his trips to Shemayim, Shabbos afternoon, he used to go in Vekas to Shemayim in some way, one of his trips, he met the soul of Mashiach, and he asked him, when are you coming? And he says, when you make the wellsprings of Chassidus reach to every single Jew everywhere. So he was informed that a new soul was coming to earth, and that it would come in 3 years. And he was even told who the parents would be. The parents were a great tzaddik called Reb Baruch, their wife Reb Rivka, and the Frierdiker Rebbe has 2 volumes of memoirs in which he details in great detail the life of this Baruch. He was an absolutely incredible tzaddik, poor as he would never take a handout, did manual work. It was a deeply deep learner and great Kabbalist. And so the Baal Shem Tov, who used to give a farbrengen, a tish, on High Elul, nobody knew why. Now we know from the Frierdiker Rebbe telling his son to reveal it 50 years later that we knew that he did it because it was his birthday. But nobody knew that was his birthday. So at one such birthday, 3 years before the Alter Rebbe was born, he announced at this farbrengen that the Alter Rebbe that there was a new soul coming into the world, and they were very, very lebedik. The whole Elul is just before Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and serious time. But that year, they all the davening was to Simchas Torah and Nigunim, and he was very, very lebedik. The Baal Shem Tov decreed that the Alter Rebbe could never see him or speak to him in his lifetime, except on one occasion, on his Opshurnish. He was taken there by his mother. Reb Baruch wasn't allowed to come. I don't know why. The mother and aunt brought him, and he cut his hair and left the payas, and he was rushed out of the room straight afterwards and never saw him again, never saw the Baal Shem Tov again, never spoke to the Baal Shem Tov again. And the reason for this that's other farbrengens as to why that happened. We haven't got time for it to go there. But what the Alter Rebbe's huge revolution to the Baal Shem Tov's huge revolution of saving Jewry was that he introduced for the first time that all this spiritual component that I've been trying to describe with the stories should be driven by intellect and should be driven by effort and intellect. So the Polish Rebbeim, who were learning from the Baal Shem Tov had 60 Talmidim. And one of those was a man called the Moged of Mezrich, who was the greatest. It was the second generation. He had 120 Talmidim. Those 120 Talmidim became the heads of all the Hasidic houses of Europe. They're all tzaddikim, they're all unbelievable gaonim, right? But these men, all of these men were totally saintly, but it had nothing to do with intellect. You saw a man like that Davin, and when you went home to Davin that day, you Davin differently because you see it. You see the goods. So, but the Alter Rebbe said that's not good enough for us. We live in a generation which has to be driven by intellect and effort. And we're running out of time, but I'll make this shorter and explain this. That why was that so? And he wrote the Tanya and he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and that's given us an ability. If you learn Chassidus, you come to Chassidus Shirim and you learn about Chassidus, You learn to see in color. That's the difference. I ask you, Menachem. I mean, is it a good description? One way you see in black and white, and then all of a sudden, slowly, you begin to see in color, and you can't go back. You're not going to go back to seeing in black and white.
Not only you can't go back, but you're trying to dig even.
That's right. So, but this comes through effort. How do we know? Let me go back to the first story, my mother-in-law. Let me ask you an incredible question. Do you think that my mother-in-law became a frum Jewess after this? Do you think my mother-in-law went to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe? Do you think she kept Shabbos, Kashrus? She saw all of that at home in Hungary before the war. Did it change her? For 5 minutes it did. She had the operation and it was successful. But after that, it's gone, right? What's the problem with the miracle? Why in Chabad were the Rebbeim so reluctant to allow that to be underlined, the miracles? Because they don't last. But if you put in the effort, you got to work, and you sit and learn, and you begin to understand, it does make a change. And that's what the whole of Tanya is about. The whole of Tanya is to teach you and me how to live, not how to exist. Everybody, the 8.5 billion nefoshos on this planet, they're all existing. They get up in the morning, they struggle through the day trying to avoid the bullets that are flying around, and they go to bed at night and make a bracha that they're still alive and whatever it is, or they lie awake and worry all night over nothing.
That's true.
And we have the opportunity to, instead of existing like that, living. And Tanya teaches how to live, and it doesn't teach how to live by miracles, overt miracles. It teaches how to live by learning what this dimension is made of. And it's a long task because it's a difficult dimension to access. But the Alter Rebbe in Tanya and in the way that the Shulchan Aruch is written introduces an ordinary Jew into the pathways to access these things, these areas which are a different dimension, a spiritual dimension. And you begin to live as a progressively more spiritually focused life. So this new soul that came into existence, the Alter Rebbe's new soul, was given the job of, and he was a genius. So at the age of 2, he knew the whole Tanakh, and with commentaries. I mean, our children, you're proud if they can talk at the age of 2. If they're boys, the girls speak a bit earlier. You're not allowed to acknowledge that, but that's the reality. So, and by the time he was 12, he gave there's a famous thing that all the Rebbeim in Europe came to listen to him give an explanation of Rambam's explanation of the planetary system and the astronomy system, and they were just gobsmacked, overwhelmed with he was an incredible genius, a genius of once in a few thousand years. But that genius that he had was for the purpose of being able to order this spiritual dimension that we're talking about, where the Rebbe can say you should have an operation, you shouldn't have an operation, into the second level, where if you want to do it, you can do it. It's a matter of effort. How? I'll teach you how, says the Alter Rebbe. Learn Tanya. Learn my Rebbeim's Chassidus, and you'll learn the pathways. It's learnable. You know, I like to paint, so I often hear people say to me, "Oh, I wish I could draw." Now, my painting teacher told me that he can teach anybody to draw. You just got to learn. So some people have more talent, some people have less talent, but I promise you, he says to me, everybody can learn to draw. I have no experience of whether that's true or not. I'm just repeating what he tells me. But one thing we do know, that every Jew with a neshama has the ability to learn to live, not just exist all day. I'll give you, and I'll finish with just examples that everybody in this shir knows, and the people who are listening on the thing know because we do it so often. For example, and let me just take something very big and very deep and reduce it to something with a language we all know together. So you can have a person believe or witness a miracle like the Rebbe used to do these miracles, right? Why did the Rebbe do these miracles, by the way? Because after the war, he believed that what the Baal Shem Tov needed to do for Jews at that period of time needed to be done for the Jews post-Holocaust. So there were very many miracles in Chabad, and we all witnessed them. And many families and every Chabad family had a litany of them to talk about. But the miracles that we witnessed don't last. That's the reality. They don't, like with my mother-in-law. She didn't become a Lubavitcher Chassid. Who becomes a Lubavitcher Chassid? Someone who sits and learns Chabad Hasidus and realizes that it's difficult. It is a different perspective. It requires change. But that change that it requires, and that change is driven by intellect. So, so our pattern works like this. This is what I was about to say. You start with the fact that, is there a God or not? If we agree there is a God, that God created the world. We agree that Hashem created the world. Then what do we know? We know that Tanya teaches that he didn't just create the world, he's recreating it every moment. If he's recreating it every moment, does that mean every atom and every molecule? Yes. If it means every atom and every molecule, does that entail control? Must be. So if he has control, then everything that is happening to you is happening to you deliberately. If everything that's happening to you is deliberate, where's your free choice? We learn your free choice is how you react to what's happening to you deliberately. Now, what is what's happening to you deliberately good and bad, painful and not? Answer, no. It's all good. Why is it all good? Because Hashem's all good. You don't see it at the moment? Learn more. Work harder. Sit with somebody else and learn Torah, and you'll learn why it's good. And if it's good, and what about the tests that you have? So we learn. In Tanya, it's explained exactly. The tests are given to you and me, each one of us separately, because each one of us have a separate mission in life. We have a separate job to do with Gashmias. We have a separate level of Gashmias that we have to elevate. So we are given certain tests, and don't think for a moment that we don't have the koikas, the abilities to do that, because it's not fair to give you a test if you haven't. You can't tell a guy with broken legs, my son-in-law gave me this moshel again today, you can't tell somebody with a broken leg to run in the marathon. Otherwise you're a sadist. Can God be a sadist? He can't be a sadist. So if he's giving you a test, one conclusion that you can bet on 100% is that you've got the tools to deal with it. And a person who never has a nervous breakdown because thinks he can't manage, doesn't understand this. But if he learned Chabad Hasidus, he wouldn't have the nervous breakdown because he'd understand that he can deal with it. Moshish, but you don't.
You can, but you don't want it.
That's right.
But you don't do it.
And it's not that this isn't a criticism, God forbid. Most people don't know. They're not educated in this. So that's what the Alter Rebbe came to this world for, to make this stuff learnable, not just that you have to be lucky enough to be in Poland in 1745 and see the Baal Shem Tov daven, or the Baal Shem Tov walk across the water on his handkerchief. But that everybody can sit down with a chabrusa, with somebody in a shir, and learn Torah and learn Chabad Chassidus. So let's give each other a bracha on Ha'elul that we'll all benefit from that. L'chaim
Можешь, не хочешь, заставим.
Robert,
Yeah.
it's better to live from miracle to miracle than without miracle.
I'm not taking. We don't take away the miracles.
Robert, you know what? In Soviet Russia, you know how they said? If you don't know, we'll teach you. If you can't, we'll help. If you're the one, we'll force you.
That's what they do.
Are you guys from Poland? Are you?
Oh, they're Russian.
Don't worry.
I'm
Sorry?
very similar.
Russia.
I am from
Ukrainian.
Ukraine.
It's very close,
No, but
Robert.
you can understand.
What you
What
say,
is
yeah,
it?
it's
Yeah,
similar.
it's close.
It's very close.
Very close.
I can't understand them when they talk fast, but I can understand a lot of the words.
Basics, yeah.
Because my
Like
parents
Russians
spoke
can-
Who
Polish
can
in the house.
understand
Russians can
Scottish?
understand
Huh?
Polish and Ukrainian.
Who can
but they can't
understand
speak.
North Folk Scottish?
You can understand.
Yeah, it's a struggle. What happened to the other guy? You were going to bring someone.
No, I don't know if he can respond. I really want him to get out of the house.
Just find that one.